Hello, everybody. I'm Alexis Brink, and I'm the president of JinShin Institute, and I'm a member of the Social Action Committee of the USA TAA. And I'm welcoming today Dr. Valerie Batts. She is the VP and co-founder of Visions, and she is a faculty of Project TA101. So welcome. And I would like to explain, we are first going to do the interview. And if you like, you can send us comments, put them in the Facebook comment box. And then at the end, we will answer all your questions. We have a lot of new people to TA tuning in as well. So Valerie, what is transactional analysis?
Transactional analysis is, first of all, a theory of personality, a way of understanding how people interact with themselves and with each other. It has also been used as a method of psychotherapy or counseling. It has been used in several other professions, in theology and in educational settings and in business. And it really is a tool for helping people change. One other thing I'd say about TA is that it is what's called an ego psychology. That is, it focuses on what are observable behaviors that we can notice in ourselves and in each other that facilitate change.
Thank you. And can you tell me a little bit about your background and upbringing, and how did you come to TA and why TA?
Sure, yeah. I grew up in Eastern North Carolina, where I am today, and I was born in 1952. So legalized segregation in the United States was the law of the land, and we grew up with this idea that as Black folks, we had a certain place in the society. And so as a young person, I think I shared with you a story this summer that you asked me to share that I would love to, about an example of what that was like when I was 6, maybe 5 years old. My brother and my father and I were going to a store. And at that time, Black people needed to go to the back of the store. In the back of the store, there are 2 water fountains. So we walk in, my brother, my father and I, there's a security guard at the door, which is common practice. And I go to the colored water fountain. They have colored and white. And my brother isn't reading yet. So he just went to the water fountain. And I was so scared that the security guard was gonna hurt him that I said, bro, you can't drink out of that fountain. And my father looked at him and looked at me, and he looked at the security guard and he said, he can drink out of that fountain. So as a young person, I was so both scared about race and intrigued about race. So that sort of was one of many stories that set the template I know now for the work that I do. And so fast forward many years, I went to college in 1970 in an affirmative action program, which brought 200 Black students to the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. While I was in that at UNC Chapel Hill, I took a course in criminology, and we were working with inmates at a prison, and the professor introduced us to the idea of I'm okay, you're okay, and to TA. And his reason for using TA was to help the inmates who were preparing for work or study release, to help them approach it from an I'm okay, you're okay position. And now we would say we were helping them challenge the assumption that they were less than, or the assumption, or to not use their anger about their situation to have them not show up in ways that got them what they needed and wanted. Mm-hmm. So that was my first exposure, which was really and I was an activist in my college years. And so it spoke to me because I was interested in psychology, and I was taking psychology courses that were not hitting my need to be able to use psychological practices to create change. So I got excited by it in that context first.
You really use TA at Visions. And about Visions, the core values are equity, integrity, diversity, inclusivity, and connectedness. Can you explain a little bit about three of your favorite ones and the relationship with TA?
So this continues also my story. While I was at UNC Chapel Hill, I ran into the Southeast Institute, which is where I met you recently. And the Southeast Institute, my initial exposure was through a person, Josephine Bowens Lewis, who folks who have been around TA will know. And we were Black students, and we had just taken over the administration building, and we were just about to get ourselves kicked out of school. And one of our advisors invited Joe to come and talk to us, essentially about TA. And one of the core values in transactional analysis is that everyone is equal and that everyone is okay, in essence. Mm-hmm. And that is what we were fighting. That is what social justice is about. That's what equity is about. So visions grew out of the years of my learning about TA through the Southeast Institute, and then going to Duke University for graduate school and looking at models for helping people see that because of the intersection between our personalities and the social systems in which we live, we are set up to have one power over and power under dynamics that we have to challenge. And I saw visions as a way to, the visions model is a way to do that. And it incorporates the assumptions of equity at the personal level and of power sharing as an option at the institutional level. And also it invites us to think about the ways in which the cultures in which we live may reinforce one up, one down dynamics, even among those of us who are well-intentioned, that we've caught it. And so that's why visions is important. And I think that our focus on change at the personal and interpersonal level, as well as change at the institutional and cultural level, are the things that I most value about visions work. And I think our notions of integrity speak to that.
Can you talk a little bit more explain about the individual level? Because the last time we briefly spoke, I was asking you a question, what can we do? And I was talking about the group, and you said about me personally. And I was just wondering if you can explain that to everybody that's listening. I think that's an important message.
So I think, one thought that comes to mind about that is another way to think about ourselves as individuals is that each of us is unique. Each person is different from each other person in some way. And in Western culture, we tend to look for similarities and we seek about assimilation. I think it's important and that each person would benefit from understanding how am I different and how am I unique. And as I do that, it means challenging individual assumptions about my okayness and about other people's okayness. So I think that's an important step on the journey. And I'm also not just an individual, I'm also part of social and cultural groups. And those social and cultural groups have an impact on how I behave in the world. Cultural scripts, it's talked about in TA. So if I can become aware of who I am as both an individual and as a cultural being, that also includes recognizing what I may have caught about differences and about others who are different than I am. And so that's a personal journey that we believe is each of us need to go on.
So is it okay to celebrate and acknowledge our differences?
Absolutely. I mean, in visions, we speak about the process of change is recognizing, first of all, seeing difference. If I've been raised to think only about similarities, I might not see difference. So seeing, recognizing, and then understanding what is the impact of those differences. And then comes to appreciating, celebrating, and utilizing. And that all of those steps take work and take time and take undoing, for most of us, some of our cultural scripting.
Mm-hmm. So I think we talked about diversity then. What about inclusivity?
So inclusivity is about how do we create systems that allow for difference, that allow for different perspectives, different ways of doing things, different values and beliefs also. So that I was just this morning working with a team of managers, corporate managers who are working on this issue of inclusion. And they are aware that their process, for instance, this is a global team, and they're just learning to, just something so small as accommodate differences in time zones, so that it's not so US centric in terms of how we do things. That's a small example of thinking about everyone in the circle and figuring out how do we include each of their needs and perspectives.
Mm-hmm. It seems like it shows up in many different ways. I was just in Holland, where we have a very mixed population as well. And there was this little girl she's 9 and she has black curly hair. She's black, and she gets teased by people from other countries, Muslim people, or I mean, how is it possible that in every group it seems to be happening? And what can we do? What can this little girl think? I mean,
well, I think that it's important for us as adults to recognize these dynamics. In my graduate school work at Duke, we studied a phenomenon called modern racism, or modern bias, or modern isms, which says basically that most people want to believe that we no longer have these power imbalances, and so we practice behaviors that end up ignoring them, denying difference. So children who are growing up with adults around them who aren't sensitive to the fact that differences do matter and that differences are often seen negatively, if that's not getting challenged, oppression will continue. So I think it's incumbent upon us as adults to recognize that, and to create systems in schools in particular where young people are taught to interrupt those kinds of behaviors. But it starts from recognizing that they're there. And so many of us want to minimize the embedded nature of the isms.
so what would you say to a little girl like that, 9 years old, who's being teased about her black curly hair by, we're talking in Holland, so that's a certain culture, mixing with another culture, and then another culture that's there discriminating against her? What would you say to the little girl, or would you talk more to the parents?
Both. Both. I would definitely want to talk to the parents and to the teachers and educators, and to the little girl. It makes me think of a story. I was talking with a South African woman who identifies as quote unquote colored, and she was telling me about having two daughters, and one is lighter skin and one is darker skin. And the darker skinned one was saying in the back seat, "I feel ugly," and the other one was saying, "Well, you are ugly." They were like doing that, and she said she felt so sad and she felt so upset, and she didn't know what to do. And what she decided to do was to say to them, "I feel really sad when you all talk like that, and I want you to know," to the younger one, "I love dark chocolate. And I want us as a family to recognize the beauty in every color." So she interrupted, right? She interrupted the dynamic. And so it's really important to listen and to interrupt and to offer alternative perspectives that are affirming and that build on assets and that encourage the interruption of. And so I would process that in that way with the kids, with the young people. And it is imperative that there be adult people around who create a climate where that's okay, where it's okay to challenge. I mean, where it's important and okay to challenge.
Okay, thank you. Very important, I think. Why did you decide to be on the faculty of Project TA101? And you brought in a lot of wonderful young students, a whole lot of them. It was so wonderful and interesting. Why was this project important for you?
You know, because I was a young adult myself. I was younger than many of the students who were with us last summer when I learned about TA. And as I was talking about as an undergraduate student, and it really helped my sense of my own self-esteem coming out of segregation. So it taught me that I was okay no matter what. And I was and that became an important part of what I wanted to pass on in my approach to psychology with trainees. And so that has been a motivator in my life. And so when I was invited to do this, I thought it was a way of giving back to the TA community and of modeling what it is we can do. And I also wanted to expose the younger colleagues to my mentors and to to folks who had supported me in that journey. So that's what made me want to do it.
Wonderful. You have said racism is a crack in the US foundation or a symptomatic virus. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes. So for the last, I guess, 5 years now, I've been rereading history and reading history that I had never been exposed to, even as I have been a student of history a lot. Just speaks about how much we in the US at least bury this history. But when in 1619, when Africans were brought to these shores as enslaved people or some as indentured servants, and there was the raping of land from Native people, that's been a part of our history. 1776, when the Constitution of the United States was created, there was no mention of challenging any of that. That was just part of it. Do you see what I mean? So that's what I mean by it's baked into the system. That Native people's land can be stolen and that Black people will be servants. And then if you think about how Mexicans were treated in the West. So I think that we have to own that we have to acknowledge that. And each country has its challenges around this. And so I'm thinking about the Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa and work that was done in Germany. So there's lots, this issue of power over is global. And in the US, we haven't done the work. Just now, a young woman produced a beautiful history about what happened from 1619. And she's getting death threats. There was a commission set up, the 1776 commission, to say why this wasn't true. So that underlying dis-ease is what I call asymptomatic racism. That grew out of this coronavirus where so much of it can pass without you knowing it. So I don't feel like this is intentional in our generation for most of us. And we all catch some of it, or we're all at risk for catching some of it. So that's what makes me think about, that's what I think. And I'm thinking that for the next, when I think about the South African Constitution, for instance, I see embedded in the structure of the Constitution, the opportunity for equity. The US Constitution, when we really, get into it, essentially has a slant toward the owning class. And we just have to deal with that in this country, I think. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. A lot of people think that. So that's what the justice movement, I think, is. Black Lives Matter movement and the peaceful protest against, the whole system of police brutality goes directly back to the Constitution and the way in which Black folks could be jailed for
and you've
minor
worked
things.
You've worked with people in jail, right? With transactional analysis. So
That
how
was,
you have to completely. How do you? What results have you seen, and how have you
now I did that work when I was in undergraduate school before my Southeast Institute experiences, and what I saw is that the young men became much more in. We were working with them first around "you're okay no matter what," right? That was the message we were giving them, and these were almost all Black people, Black men, Black young men, and most of the people that they would be having to get study or work release from were white. So we had to talk directly about race. And when I first started in that course, there was not comfort among most of the students in the course initially were white, and there was not comfort about talking about race. And so what I saw is that if you talk directly with the inmates and be straight about what the situation is, what the deal is, we would say, they will hold their heads up and they will step into the expectations that we set for them. And I saw that happening over and over. And I saw young men get out because they took, they did their part of showing that I'm okay.
What do you think the discomfort is? Because I think that's an issue too. A lot of people don't know how to react or what is okay to say.
Yeah, yeah.
What is
Well,
it?
it's interesting. It makes me think. I worked in Holland many years with Erica Stern before she passed, and she set up the first multicultural counselor education program at the University of Utrecht. And I spent many years listening to Dutch people speak about issues of diversity and inclusion. We were calling it, I don't know what we were calling it then. The name changes to fit the situation, but I felt like one of the things that I noticed, which is similar to to many parts of the US, is there's a niceness and a desire not to hurt anybody, not to hurt people's feelings, that would that would inhibit speaking, asking questions, or raising issues that felt uncomfortable. So a lot of our work was to invite the groups to work through what are the messages that you're carrying that make you think that you're going to make a mistake or that you're going to be uncomfortable. And often it goes down to, at some core level, back to this asymptomatic racism.
Yes.
That if I say something, I'm going to be perceived as racist.
Mm-hmm.
Or that I have some racist thoughts that it's not okay for me to share, that I don't feel good about, and I don't want to share.
So are you saying for people to speak out in an appropriate way? I mean, we just had all these protests, and my son, he's protesting, he's very involved. So are you just saying for people to speak out and really look at an individual level, how they feel about it, and then do speak out?
I think speaking out, I think talking to people in your own circle, white people talking to each other about race, for instance, heterosexual people talking to each other about heterosexism, men talking to each other about sexism, etc. That we need to interrupt the denial, but going back to recognizing, understanding, appreciating similarities and differences. Mm-hmm. So we're both similar and different. And I think that the cultural difference element of that needs to become much more familiar. As people, we talk in TA about genuine change comes with repeated corrective experiences over time, mm-hmm. right? So the child gets comfortable. I remember, it makes me think of a story of Muriel James once sent me a client when I was living in Oakland, California, a white client who had a phobia about Black folks, and they had gotten enough to the therapy far enough that he was able to acknowledge that. And so she referred him to me for some sessions, and it was a desensitization, because he had to come into the Black community, he came to my Black home. So those kinds of repeated corrective experiences at the personal level. I also want to say that's not enough. We need to understand, how do the systems of oppression, the structures of oppression, negatively, differentially impact folks. I'm reading a book by Jill Lepore, which talks about African enslaved people as the first manufacturers. So think about manufacturing, cotton and the cotton gin, all of that was produced by Black bodies. Mm-hmm. Where's the financial compensation for 300 years of that, right? So that's the institutional question. So I just want to be clear that I'm not just talking about personal. That's a necessary but not sufficient condition.
That was one of my questions. What about, how do you feel about reparations? How important are they?
Well, I think it's important, and I spoke about this summer. Every family, I'd love to see every family look at its history, whether your family are descendant from enslaved people, and or from people in the middle, and or from wealthy people, and to look at, how have I benefited, and or how have I been not had adequate reparative acts. And to think about, what do we need to do as a country, and each country will have to answer this, to correct those wrongs. I think that again, looking at the South African experience and how they're trying to figure out how to change the history there, is one place we can look for models, but we do need to do that. Otherwise, we will continue to repeat. Residential segregation, all of that are still the current, manifestations of the history that we're talking about.
Education, and yes.
So yeah, I mean, you might decide that people, depending upon one's resources, there is free education for 100 years or whatever it takes. So mm-hmm. So that the goal, we need to think long-term. Western thinkers are often short, give me the short fix. Mm-hmm. This is a re-parenting, a re-education process. at all 4 levels: personal, interpersonal, institutional, and cultural. I don't know about in where you are, but here in the US, residential segregation hasn't really changed significantly. So most folks are not interacting across difference in genuine ways. Those of us who believe in, who have these values maybe, but the majority of the world in this world aren't.
But you have a big job to do, Valerie.
I know. I'm passing the torch. I'm passing the torch. I was thinking, one of the things that's sad, that's hard is, in 1980, when I got married and I was going off into my life in California, we were starting to then talk about visions, because we were seeing that most white liberals thought the problem was solved. I remember there was resistance to reinstating the Voting Rights Act, which protected and allowed Black folks to vote in the South and all over the country. And as you see now, we're still fighting voter suppression, and we're still, that whole thing about Georgia, it's like the fact that we're still here is, 40 years later, is a bit disheartening, I must say. That's another reason I chose to speak at that conference, is just wanting to get more people engaged in what can I do and what can we do as individuals and in our communities. Which is the other thing I would say about what we should do is find groups that are doing work in these areas and connect. And if you're from historically included groups, and being an ally is listening as much as talking and sharing and being witness. So those are some things that we can do.
Can you say something about how TA may be most useful in our current cultural moment for social and cultural change?
Well, I think that people who use TA to do personal growth work with individuals, either in psychotherapy, counseling settings, or in education, can make sure that they are also thinking about TA and cultural scripts and how culture intersects with personality. So that's one thing, is that each client becomes aware of themselves, more aware of themselves as a cultural being. When I was a young therapist at Virginia Commonwealth University in the 80s, we were doing what we call culturally sensitive psychotherapy, which one of our goals would be that a client would come out not just feeling better personally, but feeling some commitment to social action. Because we would suggest that some of the ways in which we experience depression or other kinds of emotional challenges has to do with how we're responding to the culture, even if we don't know that.
Yeah.
So I think it's still very relevant for that. I also think it's relevant for helping have a framework for interrupting the games we play with each other and learning how to be in more intimate interactions across difference.
Yeah, I really like what you said about okayness and the okayness inside of each person that we all have. Because I was even thinking, when people come from a racist parents, is there some transference right there? Could there be? And to go back to our really innate okayness, because they say we're not born racist. However, if the influence of both parents are racist, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, well, I can talk. That's a really important point.
That is one of my personal questions.
So I think one thing we say is parents who have caught old-fashioned racism, right? So that's to distinguish between, to acknowledge that we don't assume that anyone is born that way.
Right.
And many of us catch it so early, most of us. And when my daughter was born in 1987 in a hospital in Richmond, Virginia, I noticed this because I was already doing this work, that because of the history of segregation and of racism, Black nurses worked at night, tended to work at night, white nurses in the day. Now, nobody talked about that as race, but that's race, right? Mm-hmm. And so I also noticed the Black babies got picked up more at night. The white babies got picked up more during the day. You see? Wow. So it's that early. It's that early, right? And I'm not saying it's that early all the time for everyone. And noticing, where did I catch this and how did I catch this, is really something that TA can help people with.
Wonderful. I have one last question to you, and then we'll go to the questions that we are receiving. What is your message to the younger generation to support diversity, equality, and inclusion?
I think know that you are the future. You can make a difference, that each young person can take up what we're talking about and can start interrupting oppression, because children see injustice. If you think about, if those of you who have children or spend time around children, you notice that they notice. And so I want to encourage young people to listen to that part of themselves and to be willing to get the support for speaking up about that. So that's one thing. And I also think that educating yourself about history is really, really important. And I think it would be, I mean, many, many young people who do that become very powerful leaders. And then you educate and you lead adults. I mean, the older adults. I think that's a really important piece. And thirdly, I think that most social movements have been led by young people. And so I want to encourage all the young people who might be listening, or all of you who influence young people, to know that you can take a stand today. It's not about waiting to your turn. There was this song, Waiting for the World to Change. Mm-hmm. Lead the world, don't wait for it to change, because it's your energy, the young people's energy, that helps us keep on moving. I had the pleasure of speaking with one of the founders of Black Lives Matter about 5 years ago now, as they were just getting started. And we were talking we were at a church, and we were talking about Black Lives Matter. And one of the things that I felt like she really appreciated is my commitment to the value of righteous anger. Mm-hmm. You know, again in TA we talk about the role of different emotions, and righteous anger is a tool for fighting injustice. And so it's important that we know that, and that young people be supported in that.
Mm-hmm. Can you then just explain what righteous anger
is? Opposed to hostility, right? As opposed to antagonism, right? But you stepped on my toe, get off my toe, right? It's about reestablishing boundaries, reestablishing expectations, setting conditions for alliance, connection. That's what I mean by righteous anger. Generative, it opens up space because it interrupts games.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. And Lola's going to put in the comments a link to give a donation. And after we get off, JinShin Institute will make a donation to Visions. We are very supportive of your work. And just for people to know, like, how will this money be used if they decide to make a donation?
Yes. So we are Visions is in transition. I don't know if we had done that back in July, but we have a new executive director as of March, a year. I can't believe it's been a year. And as you saw, we have been been working to develop a new younger set of consultants, because we realized that this work is not over and that we all are getting older. And so we need support for the training program that we have to support those young folks. We also just in the last couple of weeks have hired a new program manager who will be increasing our outreach in the space of connecting our work with other groups who are doing social justice work. So we're going to be having new programming, and if you join our website, we're already doing webinars on various topics like criminal justice and working with young people, and topics that apply our model to these very important issues. And we need financial support for that.
Wonderful. Well, we are supporting you, JinShin Institute. So there we go.
Thank you so much.
Lola, were there any questions for Valerie or for myself? Yes, there are some questions that are coming up. Do you want to read off the first one?
Sure. What can TA organizations do to create cultural change, inclusion, and equity?
What can TA I think you're going to have to read it for me.
What can TA organizations do to help create?
Oh, here it is. Okay. What can TA organizations do to create cultural change, inclusion, equity, without taking a political position? Good question. I think it comes from Janice, our very own Janice.
So what is your response to that, Alexis?
No. I think I'm going to pass this to you.
You're gonna pass on it. So I would, if we were talking, Janice, I would ask what taking a political position might mean. But so that's one thing, is to clarify what does taking a political position mean in your particular TA organization, because it may mean different things in different groups. In some cases, when any talk about justice is seen as a political position, so that needs to be addressed. And I also really want to advocate that TA organizations who are interested in this area, this space, find out who else in your network is doing this work. I think we have too many, I don't want to be judged, we have a lot of organizations that are each doing their thing, siloing. And I'd love to see more partnerships. And I think that would be a really powerful thing that TA organizations could do, is create partnerships with other organizations committed, who have similar values and who are committed to goals, and particularly organizations that might need more support than they have because of access issues.
Great, thank you. We have another question, and Lola's gonna read it off.
From Arun, how do you ensure effective contract when you go large scale TA teaching? When TA is taught at large scale, is there a risk of degrading it into pop theory and practice? How to prevent that? When TA is taken up for mass training, is there a risk of playing one up? Would you give experience from different parts of the world on how TA was applied at large scale for people belonging to different socio-cultural backgrounds?
That's a big question. Long question.
Yeah, I don't
A little
know.
bit about that actually before. Yeah, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, you go. No, I don't know that I can answer that whole big question without having more, us having more dialogue, which again is okay, because this is hopefully the beginning of more.
Right.
And as I said, we start the work. I've worked with people like working in the prison. These were young men who had no economic resources, and they got it. I mean, that's one of the things that's interesting. TA has a kind of intuitive quality to it for many people. And so it never has been an issue. I remember doing many training programs in South Africa between 92 and 2002 with early childhood educators. That sector of the country in South Africa was less regulated. So we could do work there. USAID funded this work. We could do work with them to understand how to empower themselves as the new South Africa was emerging. And these also were mostly economically disadvantaged, from economically disadvantaged communities, often activists, community leaders, who you might say weren't formally educated in the way that we like to think about that. And they, again, intuitively, it made sense to them. So I think that the challenge that I've seen in the US is actually kind of the opposite, where those of us who have lots of degrees often devalue TA because it's too simple or too simplistic.
Isn't it that Eric Byrne, one of his original visions was to make it understandable to
and accessible to the
child in Africa and somebody from a from a corporation or something like that, for any level that it's understandable. So it's really it's very people can really recognize it within themselves very easily. TA. So we can base it on that and keep it authentic.
Yeah, and I also think that I'd make a distinction between sharing the information and inviting people to try it on, and contracting for change. I see those as two parts. So often we will do that presentation of information, awareness generation, and sharing, and then have a separate experience for people who want to actually contract for change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wonderful. Lola, are there more questions?
Yeah.
She's going to read it out.
Okay.
From Yolanda, can you talk about techniques that we can do on a personal level that gets to our core where we may have been injured? The child inside need to be.
There are several cultural script questionnaires that, again, the Southeast Institute started, is where I learned about a lot of those tools. So those can be made available to you. There's I had an article in the TAJ a long time ago called Knowing and Changing the Cultural Script Component of Racism. So if you are in the TA community and can get access to that, it gives you questions to think about. So those are two thoughts that come to mind.
And I also refer back to Project TA101.
Yes.
You talk so much about it and you're telling all these stories, and that's certainly directly related to this whole subject. I mean, this project, TA101, is related to diversity, equity, all of it, and you talk about it. So I keep looking at it.
Yes, I was thinking that, yeah, because in there, one could follow and think about themselves, do what we call in visions a self-focus as they listen to the 101 course. Yep, that's a good strategy.
Good. Lola?
From Debbie, can you talk some more about the importance of knowing what makes you unique? And how do you make the step to talking about the differences?
Good question.
So in terms of talking more about that, they talk about each snowflake is different. I mean, it's like, I don't know, what are the metaphors for uniqueness, but that, even twins who are born a few minutes apart can be very different. So just the idea that it's a worldview. I mean, some cultures value difference as at the core. And so it's kind of to think about, what would it be like if I grew up in a family that saw my uniqueness, that said from the beginning, each of my children are different, and this is how this one is, and this is how that one, that it's about shifting our frame of reference to notice, how am I unique from every other person? It's so, at least I know I struggle with this now, even at my age, that, it's hard to be the person who seems different in a conversation, right? If you're around a lot of people, everybody's feeling the same way. That pressure is maybe a part of what makes it difficult. So learning to affirm that it's okay for me to have a difference, and it doesn't mean that I'm not okay. So that's what I say about that.
Celebrate your own authenticity.
Authenticity, yeah. And then the second part of the question was what? And then what was the second part, Lola?
Yeah, it was the importance of knowing what makes you unique, so that you can make the steps to talking about the differences. Yeah.
So if you've done what we were just discussing, then you initiate, and do expect that sometimes people won't be so welcoming. So that's the other thing, is that I internally know that I'm okay, even if I'm getting silence. For many years, when I would present on these topics in white spaces at psychology conferences or even at TA conferences, people would talk to me, but not about this topic. Because it's uncomfortable. So go in, I guess you say, lean into your discomfort and know that it gets more comfortable the more we do it. So, yeah.
Great advice. Thank you.
Question from Rajiv. What are the TA related games in the session? Scope of research in TA.
I don't understand that. Not sure. What are the TA related games?
TA related
you're
games?
Discussing perhaps in this talk, and then the different scope of research within TA. If you can speak to that.
I don't know.
Okay, so well, is there another question? Maybe he can explain further and we can get back to it. So let's go to the next one, and maybe you can explain what you mean exactly, and we'll get back to you.
Okay. Wayne, for Dr. Batts. I've trained and coached over 4,000 organizational leaders. A common question I received from them about inclusion was, how do you recommend we set limits to inclusion? For example, they do not want to do business with a sociopath.
I'm not, again, these are hard conversations for looking on the Zoom, and the thought that comes to my mind is that, again, it goes back to the limit setting function that we learn in TA. If someone is dysfunctional in an organization, then they need to have an intervention. That's not an exclusion. It's accounting for the fact that the person needs something that we can't offer in this context. So I think that inclusion doesn't mean that they often talk about inclusion as lowering of standards or somehow watering things down. It's not about that. It's about inviting people to come in, include that, and finding the structures and the process for allowing that to happen. So I think that in some ways, we've gone to the extreme of seeing inclusion as meaning let anything goes or letting people do whatever they want. That's not how I see it.
So
Yeah.
we're not lowering our standards or anything. We're just being inclusive. I mean,
Yeah.
that makes total sense.
And if someone is not well or doesn't need to be in the space, we wouldn't do that in a way that says you're excluded forever. We're just saying you need some support and some help. How can we do that? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that in corporations, I mean, when you talked about it, was when your organizational leaders, my own sense is that as I work with them, many organizational leaders in this generation did not have support for their emotional and moral development as part of their growing into leadership because of the psychological games and the corporate games and the corruption and all of that can get in the way of someone being okay. So that would be a I'm okay, you're not okay position, most likely. And so interrupting that is just as important, helping people have one of the articles that we're using a lot right now, the key to inclusive leadership and the role of humility and listening and acknowledging what I don't know. Those are key leadership skills for an inclusive society.
Thank you.
Question from Constance. How does one determine what the differences are if different people have different ideas of what is different? How do you handle when someone sees a difference and the other person that is different does not want the difference to be considered or given any weight?
Well, we have a set of guidelines and visions, and one of them is we can agree to disagree. So that might be an instance where we would need to do that. And so that's one thought that comes to mind. And also the idea that if someone doesn't want the difference to be noticed, I see that as a sign of what we would call a survival behavior, that it's been an easier, assimilation is often easier than acknowledging difference. And so it can be really difficult to shift that, but it's a survival behavior. I was coaching a woman from India the other day who said growing up in India, she didn't think of herself as a person of color. And now that she's come to the US, she's kind of in the journey of figuring out what that means. And then I shared with her some learning about caste differences in India and how often people who had privilege there see it that way. And she acknowledged that she realizes that that's some of what she's working with, is how to transfer from a position of privilege in her cultural context to the United States culture where it's different. So that's just part of recognizing, understanding, appreciating, and utilizing differences.
Yeah, to look at the cultural aspect is so important. I learned a lot about that at Project TA101 with you. So very, very important. Any more?
A couple more questions. Another from Constance. Are people who don't agree with these ideas not okay? What if they don't agree? Are they wrong?
Yeah, again, that's where the guideline we have of it's okay to disagree. So I think that's where, if I may not agree with your idea, and you certainly, again, the personal level, you have a right to have whatever opinion you want. How that plays out interpersonally will depend upon the context. So I don't think it's about making people wrong. It's about agreeing to disagree around values or principles and letting that be okay.
Yeah. Lola, one more.
One more from Paul. Dr. Batts, have you noticed a change in how receptive corporations are to learning about concepts like this?
Yes and no. The reason I say that is when we first started Visions in in 84, US corporations were just coming to realize that their lack of cultural sensitivity was impacting their bottom line. There's a story about Chevrolet trying to sell the Nova, no-go in Spanish, in Spanish-speaking countries, things like that. So they were, because of the bottom line, needing to think about cultural difference. So in that sense, as it was getting quiet in other places, as they were moving into global spaces, they were some of the first to step into this. So on that hand, that was true in the 80s in a way that it was true in corporations and in healthcare in ways that it wasn't so much true in some other settings. So that's one side. On the other hand, these days, it is very likely that many corporations are doing what we call performative diversity. That is, they're doing the things that have them look like they're doing it, but they're not looking, unless they're examining the deep culture and values of the company. It's likely that it's going to be more like a revolving door, where they will have people of color or women or other historically excluded groups in the business, but retention and promotion become the challenges. So we're seeing that there, and especially since the George Floyd incident in these last few months, we've been getting lots and lots of calls, and we've been learning how to discern when are folks really trying to set up a process that looks like they're doing it versus those who really want to explore what are our values and assumptions that will need to change for everybody, because we do believe it's about everybody. And what's exciting is in two places I'm working now, we're hearing the white guys say, this is the first time we've tried these things on when I really feel like you're talking about me too, because they're seeing that they are being valued for their uniqueness, and they're being given skills in listening, having humility, admitting what they don't know, which is anybody feels liberated with that, right? Yeah. So yeah. So they're seeing the power for us all. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the oppression hurts everybody. It's just that privilege blinds us to.
Yeah, very, very good and very helpful information for all of us that are watching. Mm-hmm. Dr. Batts, thank you so much. And I hope that everybody will share this video, look at Project TA101 and make a donation to Visions.
And come to some of our workshops in our programs as the years go by, because we're going to be here. We hope to be here. All right.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation.
Okay.
All right. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.